Hey guys, today I've got a first for you. I've had scientists and philosophers and lawyers and all sorts of folks, but today is the debut of a film director on my show, Tony Ayres, Australian acclaimed film director. How are you, sir?
Hi, Gareth. How are you?
Great, thank you. I wanted to sort of give a context to the beauty of the internet and how people can get to meet where otherwise they could have never met. I wanted to give the background of how I reached out to you. So about 2 weeks ago, I was sitting after a long, hard day at working. My wife had fallen asleep. So I started looking around for something to watch. Here's this Australian movie, never heard of it, Cut Snake. I start watching it maybe 5 minutes in. I'm utterly hooked. I'm transfixed by it. Then this unbelievable song comes up from my childhood as a young boy in the disco era, For the Love of Your Man. I said, oh my goodness, this is an unbelievable movie. So then I watched the movie, and after I watched it, I said, I've got to find out, the background to this movie, who made this movie, and so on. So I went on YouTube, saw an interview with you discussing how you cast the various characters, and I said, I've got to reach out to this guy. This guy's got some emotional depth. We need to chat. So that's the background to how we met, and thank you so much from taking an invitation from an otherwise random stranger from the other side of the world.
Oh, thank you. It's very exciting. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you actually found my film on the other side of the world. And it is a strange world now where, like the film was quite a small film and it came and it went. And but every now and then, I get a message from someone like yourself, or I have recently been speaking to a producer in Germany who just kind of saw it randomly as well and wanted to work with me on a film. So, we the world is both a very big and a very small place these days.
So true. So to build on the YouTube interview that I had seen of you, I thought that it was, and as somebody who studies psychology and behavioral sciences and so on, I loved the part where you were discussing in the interview the specific qualities that you had looked for in the three main protagonists, and that there were certain sort of innate traits or aura that would be exuded from these folks that you were looking for. Could you discuss this? And I don't know if it would be relevant for you to discuss a bit the plot line of the movie. I don't know if you want to give away anything. It's up to you. You decide. You're the film director.
Okay, okay. So, Cut Snake is a film about a young man. His name is Sparrow, and he's kind of going out of prison, and he's trying to go basically straight in every way. He's getting married to a beautiful young woman who comes from a fairly wealthy background. He's got a job and he's trying to pull his life together. And then someone comes from the past, his former cellmate, Pommy, and Pommy is determined to drag Sparrow back into a life of crime, and to the point where he will destroy Sparrow's life rather than let him go. And it's a predominantly three-hander. It's a psychological thriller in some ways, and it's a story of unresolved sexuality as well.
Right. So you didn't give away any of the meaty stuff, so that's good. Now,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
because as you described the qualities that you were looking for in the people who would play those parts, having just seen the movie, I could completely get what you were describing. In other words, it wasn't just the fact that somebody could act the part of being an ominous
yeah.
looking guy. There was something that had to be innately in the disposition of the person. How do you look for that in terms of casting somebody? How does that process work?
I often find with casting, my own preference in casting is to find, often I find actors tend to break down into sort of dominant qualities. So and it's a bit of a Chinese, slightly superstitious kind of thing that affects me. But for instance, I'll see an actor and I'll think they're very fiery, they've got a lot of fire, or they've got a lightness. So I think of air, or they've got something a little fluid about them, and I think of water, or they're kind of very grounded, and I think of earth. So they're kind of core qualities that actors have, or that they make me feel when I see them audition and work. And then I sort of try to match those core qualities with the core qualities of the character on the page. Like, for instance, in Cut Snake, Pommy, the villain, is very much fire. You know, it was absolutely, you know, and literally fire.
Yeah.
And then you know, for Paula, who is you know, the love interest and the girl that Sparrow is in love with, there was something very light about her. So I was sort of thinking air, and I needed an actress who had an innocence about her, and then there was Sparrow, who's the main character, who I guess, I mean, you know, water is probably you know, the obvious one, because he's a very fluid character.
Yeah, right. Don't give away anything. So how do you decide what project to work on? And I guess one of the things that we'll talk about is the creative process within your domain. So I understand how the creative process works in the scientific domain, but I'm always fascinated to learn from people who excel in other fields, whether it be as a chef or as a film director. How does your process work? So how do you decide as a first step, and then we'll talk about the actual process of filmmaking, how do you decide this is a movie or this is a story that I'd like to tell? And then how did you apply that to this particular movie?
Um, I've been involved in the script of this movie for quite a long time, and you know, in some ways, you know, you commit to something, and then you sort of feel like you have to honor that commitment, and so you know, we just kept going at it and going at it until we got the right cast, and then raised the money to make it. So it was you know, for me, I'm taking on a project. I would always, I need to be it needs to tick quite a few boxes these days, because there's so many things you can do. One, it has to be, it has to say something that I don't feel that I've seen said before. And two, I have to be emotionally affected by it. So I have to be moved by it. And then three, it has to take me into a world I feel like, is either reinvented through the angle that the story comes in, or it's a world I haven't seen before. So they're the three dominant things. And then the fourth one, with the producer's hat, is that it has to be a story which I think can get financed and made and seen.
Right.
And, you know, and films are hard, because films are hard to get financed, and films are hard to get seen as well once they are financed. So I also work in television a lot, and in that medium, I would sort of say those same principles apply, except for, you know, you bring in the financier, the broadcaster, much earlier, so it's much more collaborative from an earlier stage.
Have you been following, I'm sure you probably have, some of the changes in the industry whereby, you know, for a while, television was no longer seen as sort of a prestigious medium, you know, everybody wanted to sort of be on the big screen. Whereas now, with the advance of Netflix and, you know, HBO and all this kind of stuff, a lot of the big stars, whether they be directors or actors, are now very interested in returning to the smaller screen. Can you comment about this movement?
Yeah, absolutely. I started training as a film director and a film writer, and but what happened was when I got out of film school, I mainly worked in TV, and I kind of worked at the more prestige end of TV. I worked in miniseries and limited run series, and then started directing films, and I directed 3 films. And about, I would say, 10 years ago, I sort of felt a shift in the air, and I sort of started seeing, you know, in the world, this amazing television being made. I mean, it's been going on for longer than 10 years, but I think that what's happened is that I think that premium cable really led the way in America, like HBO, obviously, Showtime, and then AMC. They led the way for creatives to be able to tell longer form stories. But before that, TV drama was very much episode of the week, like one episode at a time, and very self-contained. And so stories didn't continue. So if you missed an episode, it didn't matter that you didn't see the next episode. And as a result, storytelling itself became quite disposable. You know, the whole principle was that you shouldn't care whether you missed one or the other, but that also meant you didn't care about the thing in itself. So with the advent of something like HBO, storytelling became much more serialized. I mean, that's the way that we describe it. It's much more, I guess another way of describing it is novelistic. So every episode tended to hang on a cliffhanger, which made you want to go watch the next episode, and then the advent of the DVD box set, so you would never miss any of the episodes. So you could actually tell a big, long story where you were pretty much guaranteed that the audience, or you had a fair chance of thinking that the audience would see the whole thing. And so then you got these incredible novelistic journeys be offered to us, like a show like The Wire, for instance. It's a 5-volume novel, really. And so the experience of television became a very different kind of experience for people. And it was one where the story was designed to make you care about every single episode, and also to make you care about all of this world of characters. And so what was starting to happen was that people, were watching these things and having these incredible experiences, and it became, you started to want to make those things as well, and it sort of seems to work in terms of audiences. Audiences really want those kinds of work.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
And then there was there's an explosion of content that has happened in America, then all around the world as well, where first you had AMC and Sundance, but then all these other cable companies started making scripted content, and for all of them it worked because audiences wanted it. So we're right in the middle of that at the moment.
I was going to say that from the perspective of a viewer, I actually very much enjoy I guess one would call it the binge watching, where it becomes very immersive. So I sort of catch a show after all of the seasons have been released. So this is exactly what happened with Breaking Bad. Many people who said, "Oh, I think this would be right up your alley, Gad. You really need to get into this. You'll enjoy it." And so I got into it. And once I got in, I couldn't get out. Right. Same thing happened. My wife got into a show called Suits. I don't know do you know that show?
Suits. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah. I think she got into it because she finds the main character to be particularly attractive, to which I responded, you only find him very attractive because he's a very high-powered lawyer in the show. Otherwise, if you saw him as a waiter, he wouldn't be quite as attractive. But anyways, so then I started watching this one, I got into it. So I think there's something really unique about, if I had to watch these as sort of serial weekly shows, I wouldn't have the attentional, the desire to sit there every week, wait. But if you tell me I've got, 60 shows, so I can really get into that universe and really care about these characters. Yeah. So it's a really long movie. Then I'm really going to. So I think maybe that's also the dynamic that's working.
Yeah, and also nowadays you can, we have bigger TVs, and people have great sound systems. So the difference between watching something on a tiny little box and watching something on a big screen is not the same. And the other thing that I actually think that a lot of the rise of television is also about the death of community as well, because I think that what happens is that as in our very hectic, busy sort of atomized lives, we have less and less time to connect and do communal things together. And weirdly enough, watching television is a communal thing because you can sit with your friends or with your partner or your family, and you talk through it. It's an actually much more interactive experience than the cinema. And not only that, you meet a whole bunch of people you met last night, and then you're probably going to meet again tomorrow night. So we have these proxy friends now,
Very
and,
true. That,
like Don Draper and Betty Draper and Mad Men. Like in, and the Americans is another show that I've been watching. The Leftovers. I mean, there's just so many of them, and I think that it's caused a bit of a problem for cinema. And what's happening in cinema now is that the kinds of films like Cut Snake, the films that are smaller, they're harder to get people to go and see, because people are getting such satisfactory experiences on their TV screens.
I was going to say that to build on your point about sort of communal viewing. Many years ago, before we started having children, when we had a bit more free time, my wife and I started this ritual, which is very much speaks to your communal point, where we went through the list of the AFI, the American Film Institute, top 100 movies of all time. And we said, look, any movie that we see on that list that we've yet to see, why don't we find a way to rent it somewhere? At the time, you still had, you could rent from DVDs and so on. And we'll invite people over and we'll do exactly what you said. And what was very interesting about that process for me, I mean, other than exactly what you said about the communal stuff, is that some movies I would watch and I would say, oh my goodness, I could completely see how this movie would be an all-time classic. And then other movies that would also be on that list, I would watch and I'd say, I don't think I've ever seen something as bad as this stupidity. And let me give you an example of each. There's a movie.
Mm.
There's a movie. You may or may not know this. Some of these movies. There's a movie with Betty Davis called "All About Eve," which I thought was unbelievable.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
you watch this
Yes.
and you're basically transfixed. Like it's unbelievable, right? And actually
Yes.
that led to my wife becoming sort of like discovering Betty Davis. And then other movies, a Roman Holiday. I thought it just sucked. And so, is it just that I'm a layman who doesn't understand the beauty of all these movies, or are we allowed to make these aesthetic judgments even for great movies?
I think absolutely. A movie is an experience, and it's not a static, fixed thing. And the experience, I mean, that's probably one of the most interesting things about art in general. That art only exists in relationship to someone. Like a painting, unseen is an object unknown, whereas a painting seen is an experience, and art is the experience. Same with films, like which is what is so democratic about them, really, and that's probably why they they appeal. Film and TV appeals to so many people because every opinion of it is as valid as every other opinion of it because the thing only exists in experience.
Right. So,
Um,
are you willing to tell us what are your, off the top of your head, your top five movies of all time?
oh God, I can never do that.
Or give
I
me a few. Give me a
Again,
few.
what's really interesting for me about when I try to think of these lists and name these things is that they're all quite old films,
Right.
and what that speaks to is the fact that um, those experiences that I had of watching those films were profound experiences. So that the films are as much about the time of my life when I saw them, or So, for instance, the films I love are actually the American indie films from the 70s. I love 60s and 70s. I love The Graduate, Mike Nichols film.
Sure.
I loved um, a lot of Robert Altman films. A Wedding by Robert Altman.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, there are other films also that I've loved, but they kind of come and then they go, and then and then I forget them.
So when I was growing up in Lebanon and I didn't speak really English, any English that I knew was through exposure to, well, usually to films, or maybe to pop songs or something like that. Uh, are you there? You're,
Yes.
oh, okay.
Something.
Okay. I remember seeing. So I was born in 1964, and I remember at that time Sergio Leone was very big because he was coming out with all of his spaghetti western movies. And as a probably a 4, 5, 6 year old kid, so in the late 60s, early 70s, I would see Once Upon a Time in the West with Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda, and it was sort of almost otherworldly, and that's where you sort of realized the power of filmmaking, because I could today, exactly what you said about the experience, I could re-see these movies today and almost go back, access being in Beirut, Lebanon, 45 years ago, right? it's,
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
unbelievable.
Well, I think then that's also part of the beauty because they still exist today, those films, and that in some ways, in the same way as photographs are repositories of our memories, and our memories are the kind of artifacts of ourselves. So those film experiences are also artifacts of ourselves, our past, and given how ephemeral life is now, anyway, there's something very beautiful about being able to say, Ken Russell's Women in Love, for instance, had a profound effect on me when I was a teenager. I saw it when I was a teenager. And so if I saw it now, I mean, I would bring the person I am now to it, but hopefully it would remind me of the person I was then. And in some ways, the only connection we have with our past is our memories of it.
Right. So I thought I would switch now to the actual process of being a film director. So if I sort of
Yeah.
try to, analogize to what I do, if I'm writing a scientific paper, I mean, there is a template to how a story is told in a scientific paper. You sort of propose the research problem, you provide a literature review, you posit some hypotheses. On the other hand, when you're writing a book, which I've written several books, the process is very different because it's not the same sort of formulaic blueprint of how you go about publishing a scientific paper. So you open the laptop one day and there are 0 words that are struck on your laptop, and 18 months later I come out with a 750-page first draft of a manuscript, and that process borders on the mystical, right? I mean, you go off into a cave,
Yeah.
and so walk us through. I mean, as I watch movies and I think about all the different decisions that a director has to make beyond just directing the actors, right? I mean, how did you decide to choose, For the Love of Your Man as that scene? So tell us generally how that process works and how your process works.
I guess the reality in Australia anyway is that by the time you get to make a film, that it takes a long time, and so you've probably lived with it for quite a long time. I mean, my process is very much about, I like going to the cinema to experience things and feel things, and so my process is about about firstly honoring the story, the script, the manuscript that you start off, the blueprint of what the film will be, and then you trying to bring that to life as effectively as possible, and that pretty much all the decisions that you make, and because film directing is really making decisions about this color over that color, this over that, and actually along the way you have a whole bunch of people that you're working with, like a cinematographer, a designer, a costume designer, makeup artists, sound recorders, sound designers, composers, like editors, like this whole fleet of incredibly creative people. And so your job is really to be like the captain and almost to, steer the ship. That seems to be the closest metaphor that I can find, because everyone does their job on the ship, and your job is to sort of steer it in one direction and hopefully not hit an iceberg. So a lot of my process is about communication with the actors, with the heads of department, and to sort of say, well, this is what we're after, this is what we're trying to do, this is the effect that we're trying to create, and the effects are created through in the film medium, effects are created through, the image, the power of the image, but also the power of the story. And image and story are the two key things that you have to work with. And, images create feelings, which is what visual art is about, and stories create feeling, which is what literature is about. And what you're trying to do is, marry the image with the story to create a feeling, and then create a meaning and a feeling. So that's my job.
And so first, the way I guess I would synthesize what you just said is that while different people might be in different parts of the sort of the trees, you
Yeah,
sort of have a broader view of the full forest, right? And in that sense,
that's
you're the
the
conductor.
idea.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I would suspect that one of the qualities of a director is his or her capacity to delegate. And I suspect that if you are too much of a perfectionist, that might be a problem. And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I think I suffer from maladaptive perfectionism, whereby I always think that no one is going to meet my standards of being punctilious or detail
Mm.
oriented. So where it would be a lot more productive and a lot more healthy to recognize that it is okay to delegate task X to a certain person, no, I then beat myself because I could do it better. And so then I try to imagine all the decisions that a filmmaker has to, make. And then if you suffer from that, you're going to drive yourself to insanity, no?
I mean, the fortunate thing for me is I can't do anything better than anyone else. And that's actually true of most directors, because most directors, by the time they get to the film set, are the least experienced person on that film set. Because directors don't get to, because films are big, expensive things to raise money for and make and put together. And so, actually, the irony is that you have these young first-time filmmakers then leading people who've had 20, 30 years of experience in the business. So I think that an obsession with detail. I mean, I think every director has different strengths and weaknesses, and there are different kinds of directors. I think I'm very story focused, probably because I come from a more literary, writerly background. Others are more visually focused, and there's the rare breed who do both incredibly well. But the, I think you do have to care about the detail, because the meaning is in the detail,
Right.
and you and what's kind of weird is it's slightly alchemical as well, because you can put this particular actor, this particular director, this particular cinematographer together, and it'll look like one thing, and you change one ingredient and it'll look either completely worse or completely better. It's so much to do with circumstances and alchemy.
So let's drill down that exact point. So if you're talking about, say, the same actor
mm,
who could be directed by various
mm.
directors, how would that work out? What are the different styles of directing that might lead to different outcomes? Is it simply whether you grant more independence to the actor versus whether you direct them more? I mean, is that the key dichotomy?
Yeah. Often, I think that's one of the differences. I think, say for instance, the way I would relate to an actor is I just try to be their first audience. I try to keep it fairly simple and direct, because I feel like if I've made the right casting choice, then all I can do really is let them know what the story is and what the consequences of their action, to help them understand why they're doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying, and then try to get a range of different kinds of emotional reactions in a scene, so that I've got variation to play with in the edit suite.
Gotcha.
So that's the way I would direct an actor. Other directors don't say very much to actors at all. and other directors are much more like prescriptive in the way that they direct actors, and different actors like different kinds of directors. It's such a I'm being a little bit vague because part of my job is also to work out what that actor needs to do their best job. Really, a director should be an enabler. Someone who can bring out the best in all the people they work with, because then you'll get the best movie.
I was gonna analogize what you said about you having to sort of work out what each actor does to my professional context. When I have students whom I supervise, let's say doctoral students, with whom I'm going to be having a 4, 5, 6 year relationship, not every student requires the same thing of me. I mean, there are certain general expectations and certain general dynamics that occur irrespective of who the student is, but some students need more constant interactions. Others would view that as a breach of their independence, and they don't want that. And so I think one of the skills as a supervisor is to get a sense of what works best with each student, and so it ends up being roughly the same as to what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Now tell me this.
Absolutely.
Tell me this. There's a study that came out a few years ago, about 10 years ago, I think, that looked at so they administered a narcissism inventory to actors, and then they compared their narcissistic scores to sort of a general population, and as would be expected from a naive perspective, the actors scored much higher on narcissism. Are you willing to confirm this through your professional opinion, sir?
There are as many different kinds of actors as people. I would still say I have an expression with some actors that their eyes are very close together, which is I this, I that. I probably, it's a very strange profession because it infantilizes people. I'm always shocked by the number of actors who don't have a drive. That's because they get driven to places. I think that it can, and I think especially if you're acting at a young age, you get cosseted, you get, your meals, and then if you're like a star,
you're getting very great. You're getting very grainy. Sorry. Is there a way you could not move too much? Yeah. Okay.
I can try to lean forward. I'll try to lean forward.
Thank you. Yeah, go on.
I think it's tough industry to try to be a good, decent human being, because I think a lot of the forces that you're working, the circumstances of the industry, because actors are also, these days, say in movies and TV, so much of the financing hangs around actors, so it is kind of all about them in a way. So if you create a world like that, I just wouldn't be surprised if there's a high level of narcissism.
Well, I wrote an article several years ago on my Psychology Today column, which was then picked up in the magazine. The title of the article was "The Narcissism and Grandiosity of Celebrities," and I was there remarking about how celebrities find it perfectly reasonable to espouse positions on fields that require great expertise, even though they may not have high school education. Now, I'm not talking about you pronouncing a political position. That everybody has the ability and right to formulate a position. But when you're talking about physics and epidemiology and evolution and science and so on, well, no, we don't care about your opinion. But I think what happens, and I try to sort of break down all the reasons that cause them to be so grandiose. If every day your experience is that people are willing to jump off buildings for the possibility of, touching you, you start developing a God complex, right? I mean, if I am Tom Cruise, I start not being able to decouple reality from fiction. I really saved the world in Mission Impossible, whatever it was. And therefore, why shouldn't you want to hear my opinion on how to resolve radioactive waste? Screw the physicist, I'm Tom Cruise. And just, I find that baffling because obviously, as a scientist, one of the things that I know is the things that I know and the things that I don't know. And when somebody asks me a question where I don't know the answer, I will equivocate in 17,000 different ways because I'm not willing to definitively pronounce a position if I'm not absolutely sure. Apparently, actors don't suffer from that epistemological doubt, right?
I think that's absolutely right. I think that and also, it's a two-way street. I mean, why does the news report this and therefore perpetuate this cycle of misinformation? I mean, why is it a news story? Like often, and it's getting worse now, by the way, because as newspapers get their resources cut back, as real news diminishes and turns into press releases, as everything goes online, and so that celebrity stories are clickbait. There's a whole kind of substrata now of news, which is celebrity news, and so as long as these things are perpetuated within our society, and I do think that celebrities are for for a country like America and Australia, countries like Australia, celebrities represent, because what it is that film is an aspirational medium. It's supposed to create, it has an ideological function as well, and that is related to capitalism, which is that it's the engine of desire in a way, creates aspiration, and so that's why film in America and Australia tends to be populated with people who are much more beautiful than the ordinary people, and they look better, and that because they're lit better, and because they you have a whole industry based around touching people up and making them people that you want to be, and for the people who live difficult lives with economic stress, you can sort of say, well, you understand why they can aspire to these glamorous lives, from the Real Housewives to the Kardashians to movie stars like Nicole Kidman, and these are all lives that look amazing, and so there is a whole industry that perpetuates that, and I think that I have to deal with it in my business because I have to deal with high-profile actors to try to make my films. But in other ways, I feel that there is too much power in the hands of too few people. It's like, say, Bernie Sanders' one percenters. Movie stars are the one percenters. They represent that, and they themselves, as people, can be good, decent, moral, ethical people. But there is a whole system that perpetuates the inequality of our system, and my own personal belief is that it is it's a form of social control as well, because if you can it's like the opiate masses. If you can dream, then you're not awake. If you can dream about movie stars, you're not awake.
Well, do you ever? I mean, you must have had stories of. Of course, you don't have to mention any names, but sort of really, truly out of this world diva behavior. If I walk into a room, the color mauve better not hit my eyes, or else I'm walking out of this movie set. Do you get this type of stuff, or are Australians inherently more humble and modest about their outrageous behavior, as say compared to the top American stars?
I think that Australians tend to be. I mean, and I also think that's why they've done so well. That they tend to be a little bit more rational.
Understated.
Well, they're not within. They're not within the system. The system that really the personality distorting system as much as American stars tend to be. Like the American system is so distorting, I think. I've actually been pretty lucky with my experiences with actors. I have a lot of friends who are actors who I think are really good, decent human beings, and and the few kind of say A-list movie stars that I've encountered, again have been good, decent people, and who work very hard not to, to fall for this kind of narcissistic syndromes. I think that interestingly, narcissism isn't within the entertainment industry is almost a system, or it's like a syndrome rather than an individual. It's a natural individual response to a systemic kind of disease.
So what you're saying is that they don't start off being narcissists, but by navigating through this industry, you sort of develop some of these narcissistic traits. That's what you're saying.
I think that narcissism is secondary result of being in this industry, in the same way that, and some people are, of course, might be drawn to it because of narcissistic tendencies, but for others, it's like if you stay in the sun too long, you get a tan.
What percentage do you think of actors? I mean, I won't hold you accountable to the specific exact percentage, but roughly, what percentage of actors do you think get into this because they're enamored with the possibility of sort of the outcome, which is wealth and fame, versus those who are truly committed, thespians? In other words, so for example, if I think about Al Pacino, I think that, I mean, yes, he's incredibly famous and wealthy and so on, but I can sort of, at least what I'm led to believe in watching him, is that this guy is really committed to his craft. I mean, he's a real actor, right? Whereas when you see the millions of people who sort of move to Los Angeles to follow the dream on Sunset Boulevard, I don't think that they're all these unbelievably, thespians, right? I mean, you don't become a professor because you want fame and glory. You typically become a professor because you really have a real deep love for that process, the scientific process. So how do you see it? Do you see it that most are ultimately just after the glory with a few true artists, or am I wrong in thinking so?
I don't know. I really don't know, because I really, admire actors, because what they do is they kind of have to expose themselves, both physically and emotionally, and that rawness takes a certain amount of courage to be able to do, and that they become the vehicles for telling stories, and they become part of the storytelling process. And to be honest, most of the actors who I'm friends with, who I know, come from that kind of background. And if there are others, then I know there are other kinds of actors but I guess I try to ascribe the best motives.
Could it be because
to the people I meet.
Could it be because the Australian industry is quite a bit smaller and more intimate? So, and actually, I was going to get into that in a bit, which is if I compare the Canadian reality, right? Canada is about 34 million people. Our neighbors are about 340 million people, or roughly. Now, Quebec, where I live, so the province of Quebec within Canada, has its own sort of unique reality, which is the French part of Canada. There are 8 million people in Quebec, so there's a Quebec cinema tradition, and then of course there's a Canadian, artistic tradition, and of course they've generated quite a lot of wonderful talent, but there's always sort of this juxtaposition against our big bad Southern brother, and that results in a dynamic in terms of the history of the film tradition within these two contexts that is quite unique. And I suspect that maybe Australia is somewhat similar to what I just described. Would that be a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Australian industry is a government-subsidised cottage industry, but what we do is we're a phenomenal talent incubator, and for Hollywood, really. Right. We are, like, you just look at the number of Australian actors who've done well in the Hollywood system. It's phenomenal. And, I think we have more movie stars per capita than anywhere in the world. And, and I think that we're pretty, and that is also because I think that we're a smaller, more collegiate, more industry, and maybe that's part of it as well. I'm not sure.
Actually, as I was preparing, to chat with you, I sort of drafted a list of some of my favorite Australian movies, some of my favorite Australian actors, and some of my favorite Australian music. So I thought I would go through some of these with you. Uh, some of these might surprise you. You might be amazed that I know some of these. So what? Maybe the first recollection I have of an amazing Australian movie, which I would probably put as one of my maybe 50 top all-time movies, 1991, Flirting. Do you know that movie?
Oh, I love flirting.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. I knew I liked you. Uh,
Yeah.
so for those of you who
But
haven't seen that,
yeah, that was a beautiful film. Tandy Newton and Nicole Kidman and John Digan directed it.
exactly,
Yeah.
what an amazing
Noah
movie.
Taylor was in it. Yeah.
Exactly. Uh,
He It was a sequel to a film called The Year My Voice Broke. Very
oh, I didn't
beautiful
know
film.
that. Okay, so I'll check that. What is the name? What is the title?
The Year My Voice Broke.
Oh, very nice. Okay, I'll check that out. The second one, which was a few years later, and I sort of, you're talking about how you can relate each of these movies to your personal experiences. In 1991, I was only in my, going from my first to second year doctoral studies. And then in 1994, I finished my PhD. I'm back in Montreal, which is my hometown. And then one of the first movies I think I saw when I returned to Montreal was Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And I thought, what an unbelievable movie! Like, so creative, the whole storyline, which of course I'm sure you're familiar with. For those of you who haven't seen it, you must go see it. Which, by the way, leads me to one of my favorite actors, who is Guy Pearce. That's a guy, by the way.
Yeah.
You need to get me to chat with him because he seems like a deep guy. He seems like a guy that I would enjoy chatting with, and I hope that he would enjoy chatting with me. Have you met him? And am I right in thinking that he looks like a really cool guy?
Yeah, yeah. I've met him a couple of times. I've never worked with him. Yeah, he is a cool guy. He does a TV show here called Jack Irish, where he plays a sort of down and out private detective,
Hmm,
and of course he has a huge international film career as well.
of course.
Yeah, no, I don't know him well, but he seems like the real deal.
Two other movies and a few other actors and some, just to kind of give the shout out to Australia. Uh, Not an all-time
Yeah,
classic, but I liked it. Lantana.
yeah,
Do you know this
yeah,
one? Yes. And then the other one, I only
yeah,
love it very much, not because the movie's so great, but because the story is so heartwarming, especially as a dog lover. Red Dog, which is actually based on a
yeah,
real story that happened in Australia. Do you know the story?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And I've seen both of those films. Yeah, Lantana is a beautiful film. It's a classic film in Australia, and it's done phenomenally well.
I think
Um,
Jeffrey Rush was
and
in
Red
it.
Dog, Jeffrey Rush was in it. Yes, I know Jeffrey, and Jan Chapman produced it, and the writer was Andrew Bavell, who was a very close friend of mine, and the director is Peter. Oh God, no, Ray Lawrence,
Oh,
who's a
wonderful.
brilliant Australian director. Um, and then Red Dog was also directed by a friend of mine called Chris Sanders, and just phenomenal box office.
And
Like,
but
it
very
really
difficult to watch,
hit an
right?
audience.
Very tough to
Sorry?
watch. Very tough to watch because you
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
put yourself in the mindset of this poor dog who just goes on this infinite search for his master or
yeah,
daddy or whatever you want to call him.
yeah.
Uh, and also music. I mean, as I sort of started developing the list, I thought, geez, they're Australian. They're now I will go on record in front of everybody in
Mm.
saying that yes, I do love the Bee Gees. Maybe it's because I was a kid of the 70s.
Me
Some
too. Me too.
the Bee Gees, you've got Air Supply, Olivia Newton-John, you've got Men at Work, Crowded House, Kylie Minogue, whose buttocks apparently are a national treasure of Australia. So you guys definitely have something in the water that you're able to create, as you said, so many incredible people
Yeah.
per capita. I thought I would chat about two more things and then we'll wrap it up because I know you have to go. So one of the things that I do in my work, so let's see if we can marry some of my scientific work with some of your interests. So I basically apply evolutionary psychology to study consumer behavior. So what are the biological underpinnings that make us consume the way that we consume? And I argue that consumption,
Mm.
I mean, it's not just consumption of Coca-Cola and Starbucks, but we consume literary narratives, we consume religious narratives, we consume friendships, we consume relationships. And so in two of my books, I talk about cultural products, things like song lyrics and movies and television plot lines, art. And I talk about how cultural products are fossils of the human mind. What I mean by that is that it allows us to look at an ancient Greek tragedy from 3,500 years ago, and we can read it today and completely understand what the author was saying, precisely because there are these universal themes that speak to our shared biological heritage. And that's what makes what you do
Yeah.
so powerful, because it's about sibling rivalry and sexual tension and status competition. There are basically five, six, seven themes that make literature what it is and art what it is. So what are your thoughts on that particular analysis?
I think it's very interesting. I think it's very true. I mean, I think there's the fact that we all live, breathe, eat, clothe ourselves, relate to each other, that and survive because of those things. That they are the commonalities of the human experience. And what's kind of interesting is how that evolves over time. The relationship, say, between technology and the body and society, for instance. I think our society changes and evolves in relationship to things like technology, things like disease, I think when you talk about them being fossils, that I think that's a really great way of talking about it, because it's almost like they're archaeological artifacts of the social conditions of the time, and often the things that make us be able to relate to, say, Tolstoy or Dostoevsky is that we recognise the human impulses behind the actions, but what makes them compelling or exotic is the fact that you also see that society has changed since those days. So the things that were strictures then were less strictures now, whereas our need for certain things like affection from each other, or status, or all of those things are still they're the foundations of what being human is.
And that's what allows something like Seinfeld, right, which is syndicated in a million countries. It's a very specific, right? It's about four sort of narcissistic, self-absorbed New Yorkers, and yet somebody in Egypt can watch this and yet really get it, right? I mean, that speaks to that universality that we are alluding to. So here's, I guess, maybe the last question. Then maybe you could wrap up by telling us about any projects that you're currently working on, if you feel like it. How do we navigate through the tension between, the process of just being an artist, right? You're a storyteller. You love the process because you love telling stories, and then the commercial tensions of, say, and again, I'm speaking here as a consumer psychologist. I did a study once with one of my students where we looked at product placements in movies. And we did a content analysis of movies both in France and in the US. France, precisely because it's considered the seventh art, and so there's sort of this highbrow attitude. So to pollute filmmaking with somebody drinking a Coca-Cola is basically blasphemy. So what's your view on that? I mean, do you have the pragmatism that says, well, hey, look, life is also about money, and if you tell me that I've got to put the BMW, I'll put it? Or are you sort of a purist? I don't want these commercial guys telling me what can or can't go in my movie.
I am a little bit horses for courses. I feel like there are some films where it just wouldn't really matter. Like if you're making a James Bond movie, then it doesn't really matter if you see a Maserati or you see some super expensive watch. I don't even know what their names are because I pay so little attention to that. But there are films that are made in a certain way. There are other films where that kind of product placement wouldn't be welcome, nor would it be sought, because that they are smaller things, more intimate things, more personal things, or more provocative things. And those companies don't tend to go for that. I would sort of say Personally, I am a bit of a pragmatist in that if it's a particular kind of product, then I will, I want the thing to be made. I want it to be seen. So I would try to tailor it to the market. But I'm not, like I've never made a big studio movie. I've never made an American network show. I sort of do the things that I do, and I try to make the best job of them, and I try to get them made. And I kind of roughly know how to do that at this stage.
Got you. So as we end it, any projects that people might not be aware of that you'd like to maybe give us a little preview of before we pack it in?
Okay, I've got a kid show that I created, which is actually screening in Canada,
Okay.
called Nowhere Boys, and it's just about to go into its third season, and the second season just won an international Emmy.
Wow.
And I've got a new show called Glitch, which is for an Australian TV show, which is all about dead people who come back to life. And I think that's going to screen soon in Canada. I should be able to announce something soon. And I'm doing a book adaptation called Barracuda, which based on an Australian novel, which I hope will screen over your way as well. And another book adaptation called Seven Types of Ambiguity. So I do a lot of TV stuff, and then I'm kind of regrouping on the movies and trying to work out. I think movies will go two ways in Australia now. They'll get bigger and be more movie star driven, or they'll get smaller and be more art, pure art statements. But and I'm not quite sure which way I'm going to lean with those, because part of me I like both of those things.
Well, I look forward to seeing all your great works, and you're welcome anytime back to continue our conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Please stay on the line. I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you so much for coming on, Tony. That was really, really fun. Cheers.